Hi, I'm Elaine Robinson. I'm professor at St. Paul School of Theology and co-pastor of the Village UMC in Oklahoma City. We're exploring what adaptive change looks like and how we as congregations can enter into this process. And in order to begin to look at what might be our most pressing adaptive challenges, we need to understand what a healthy, vital congregation looks like. Anytime you read a book about growing and strengthening your church or inviting a consultant, they will always speak to you about congregational health. And so let's look at what a healthy congregation is, and of course by analogy, it helps us think about where we aren't especially healthy. So first, as a church, it is God's mission that always frames who we are and what we do. That's the reason that the church exists. Now remember that our United Methodist Church will frame God's mission in the world as making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. It gives us a very clear vision of what the basic work of the church is and what we should be pursuing as our primary focus in the congregation. Of course, almost every one of our churches will have its own mission statement, which probably relates to the context, the place where we're located, the people we serve. It might be something like taking nominal Christians and the unchurched and making them deeply committed followers of Christ. It might be something like love Christ, serve others. But whatever our mission is, it must be God's mission in the world, transforming and helping and healing and bringing people to Christ. When we keep this mission before us in everything we do, that will provide the first step in being a healthy church. But let's go more deeply into some of the characteristics of healthy churches. And here I turn to what is known as the Transforming Church Index, which was created by Kevin Graham Ford, who is now at Leighton Ford Ministries. And it is a survey of tens of thousands of congregations across the United States. Large churches, small churches, denominational churches, non-denominational churches, in every part of the country, healthy ones, not so healthy churches. And over the almost 15 years of collecting this data, Ford has been able to come up with some basic characteristics of healthy churches that he calls the 5 C's. We want to look at these 5 C's. But first, let me make a comment here that Ford is emphasizing in the data that he has. Healthy churches normally grow. But growing churches are not necessarily healthy ones. Growth is not the main indicator of health in a congregation. You can do many things to bring in people, but whether we are forming them as disciples of Jesus Christ and transforming the world is yet another question. So remember, growth is not necessarily associated with being healthy, and all of us need to examine the 5 C's. Now, the first C that Ford points us toward is community. Now, community means the relationships we have within the congregation, how supportive we are of one another. It means that we have a certain ownership. We're invested in our church and congregation, and there's a deep sense of connectedness. This is what community represents. And of course, if we have an unhealthy church, we're a very divided and not a very supportive congregation, and people who come into our midst will recognize that. Secondly, Ford points us toward what he calls code. Now, this is a little harder to understand, but essentially he's talking about the DNA of our congregation, the basic identity of who we are as a local church. It includes what our vision is. And Ford is very clear that unhealthy churches almost never have a vision. They don't know where they're going. But if we have a vision and a sense of where Christ is leading us, we're likely to be healthy. Code also includes our worship and our sense of a dynamic and engaging kind of worship that really reaches people. It might be traditional, it might be contemporary, that's not important. But the quality of our worship is part of our code. Learning is another characteristic of code. Are we always growing? Are we learning as disciples of Jesus Christ? That discipling process is part of a healthy congregation. And lastly, Ford here includes the building we occupy. Now that may sound strange, but in terms of the code, some of us are very connected to the space that we worship in. Other congregations, the space is not what matters at all. It might be a warehouse, and they're fine with that. On the other hand, if the building does not allow us to do effective ministry, we're probably not as healthy as we ought to be. Now, the third characteristic that Ford puts before us is calling. And by calling, he means, first of all, leadership and shared leadership. If we have just the pastor or one or two people making all the decisions and doing all the work in our congregation, it's not healthy. The more people share in the leadership and the work, the healthier the congregation. And here under calling, he also puts finances. Now, he doesn't simply mean, do you have enough money to do the ministry you want to do? But he means in a deeper sense, do we have a sense of generosity as a congregation? Do we give freely? Do we understand that giving is a part of the work of the kingdom? These things, leadership and finances, and especially our attitude towards stewardship, are part of calling as a healthy congregation. Fourthly, Ford will refer to cause. And by cause, he means those things we do related to the community beyond the walls of our church. So, for example, what kind of outreach do we have beyond the walls? What kind of people are we reaching in the community? If there are single people, are we reaching them? If there are single-parent families, are we reaching them? Who are the people beyond the walls? And are we in relationship with them? And one of the most important qualities of cause in a healthy church is what Ford refers to as involvement. And his data show this. In a healthy congregation, more than 90% of the congregation understands themselves to be in ministry. In an unhealthy church, less than 20% understand themselves to be in ministry. This might be a great question to ask people in the congregation. What is your ministry? If they can name it, you're probably on track to be a healthy congregation. And lastly, the fifth category that Ford offers about being a healthy congregation is what he'll call change. Now, a healthy church is able to undertake change. Not only do we discuss changes that need to be made, but we're able to implement them. This quality of moving into action is so very important. And the other piece of change is innovation. are you willing and able to try new things for the sake of your ministry in the world and bringing Christ to your community? Again, the marks of a healthy congregation are community, code, calling, cause, and change. If we are falling short in any of these areas, it is pointing us toward our pressing adaptive changes, the ways we need to move to find health. And here's what's really important. Healthy congregations are best able to continually make changes in support of the mission of God. Health allows us to reinvent, to find new life, to continue to do God's mission in the world year after year. So whether we are a thriving 3,000-member congregation or a struggling small rural church, we are called by Christ to continually change, to find the new life, to see where grace is leading us, so that we might continue God's mission of making disciples and transforming the world.